Lawyers of Reddit, what is the sneakiest clause you've ever found in a contract? Story 1. No lawyer, but in graduate school I was desperate to find a cheap apartment. Since this was before Craigslist, I got a post from a literal bulletin board at the school. I met up with the girl who had the room, seemed fine, seemed okay with me, so I signed papers for the place. Then I moved in. Once I moved in, she had all these extra rules for me. I had to put my television downstairs in the basement, use the bathroom down there, and so on. I was sick one day and used the upstairs bathroom, which was directly next to my bedroom, and she started yelling at me. Long story short, I needed to leave. I looked at the lease I signed and it said, "This contract is null and void if rent is not paid by the 7th of the month," so I just moved out. I left a note letting her know what was up, and she called me screaming, "That was for my protection, not yours." Comment 1. In related news, as an undergraduate, I moved into an apartment with my boyfriend and his best friend. My dad, a lawyer, did not want them to bail and leave me owing the whole rent for a year, so we all signed an agreement that we would each be liable for our share of the rent even if we moved out. Turns out my boyfriend was cheating on me and had a few other habits I was not a big fan of, but I was stuck since I could not pay for 2 rents, nor was living at home an option. That was one miserable year. Thanks, Dad. Story 2. My dad bought a house in the mid-1990s to remodel and sell. He found a clause in the deed that said, "House cannot be sold to a colored person." It was written in the 1940s and had remained unchanged through several owners. He took it out. Comment 1. That is called a racial covenant, and they were really common in the United States in the first half of the 20th century. As a result, they still appear in many deeds for houses built during that time. However, they were declared illegal and unenforceable way back in 1948. Comment 2. Well, I think technically they were declared unenforceable, not illegal. You can still put them in, but they cannot be enforced because the enforcing party, the state through the courts, is itself legally bound to not enforce such clauses. The clauses themselves are not illegal per se. Comment 3. Just for your information, you cannot have clauses that violate state or federal law or otherwise remove sovereign rights. For instance, it is illegal to sell substances, so a contract stating a party must sell weed out of the house for at least 3 months of the year would be found null and void by a court of law. Similarly, you cannot write a contract to harm a person, as that is also illegal. It has been a long time since law school. I think someone else can provide the legal term for this. Story 3. Not a lawyer here, but a few years ago I was working for a small company. We occupy the entire first floor of a small building. One Monday morning we got to the office, and one half of the floor was flooded with water because the landlord's workers were moving some stuff over the weekend and broke a water sprinkler and left it that way overnight. Lots of water damage, and we relocated the people in the flooded area into the other one half of the floor that was okay. We remained like that for about 6 weeks. When it was time to pay the rent, the lease contract was written in a way that we owed rent money in its entirety, even if the facilities were not available, no matter what the reason was. We went back and forth and we had to pay, and the landlord was a real jerk about it. Then, I had what I consider a brilliant idea. When we filed for our insurance claim, we included the rent money in the damages, one half of the rent for the 6 weeks. Our insurance paid us no problem. It just so happened by pure chance that our insurance carrier happened to be also the insurance carrier for the landlord, and they were not too happy about the incompetence of the landlord, the lack of responsiveness, and the way the lease contracts were written. So within a few days from us receiving the check, we got a lot of phone calls from the insurance people asking about the building and the landlord, and then 3 people from the insurance company came to pay a visit to the building too. I guess they raised the landlord's insurance rate by quite a bit. He was absolutely mad and demanded to see the paperwork of what we filed as claims, what we told the insurance, and so on. He said that he would have to increase the rent because his insurance cost had gone through the roof. We told him to go away and moved out 3 years later at the end of the lease. Story 4. When the National Basketball Association and the American Basketball Association merged, the owners of the St. Louis Spirits negotiated to receive 1/7 of the annual television revenues for each of 4 new National Basketball Association teams in perpetuity. This was about $300,000 per year at the time, but by now has made them around $255 million. Story 5. My company was switching to a different payroll provider, and they had 3 pages of items like, "We are not responsible for the safety of your employees' private information, including social security numbers and banking information," when we asked them about it. They played dumb, then got really aggressive, then finally told us they did not want to be sued if they got hacked or had a disgruntled employee take payroll information with them when they left. Needless to say, we did not sign with them. Story 6. My company was switching to a different payroll provider, and they had 3 pages of items like, "We are not responsible for the safety of your employees' private information, including social security numbers and banking information." When we asked them about it, they played dumb, then got really aggressive. Then finally told us they did not want to be sued if they got hacked or had a disgruntled employee take payroll information with them when they left. Needless to say, we did not sign with them. Comment 1. It is a sad state of affairs when "give me your bank account and identification information, and I will not take care of it" is standard business practice. Comment 2. Somewhat related. Here in Israel, there is a huge payroll provider that, amongst others, my employers use to give me paychecks. As it works, I can log into their site and download the paychecks in PDF form. Recently, I forgot my password, so I asked for a reset. It was not a reset, they just sent me my old password. So either it is stored clear text or symmetric encryption. Horrible. And a huge number of employees have it that way. Comment 3. As a person who works in the security field online, I threw up in my mouth a little. I can almost understand it when I find that end users are storing their passwords in plain text. Yes, it is really dumb, and some people are lazy, but when you handle payroll and sensitive data like that, just crap. Story 7. Not a lawyer, but my parents, in reviewing the contract on a house they were buying, found a clause that said they had to keep all the cats, 3 long-haired cats. My mom is allergic to cats. They took it out but left the cats behind anyway. Edit. My parents still have the cats and are trying to find homes for them in central Pennsylvania. They are currently outdoor cats, and they are feeding them. They have been there for 8 months now. Story 8. This might be the opposite. I had a lawyer friend who leased a car from a dealer that had a really poorly written contract. Depending on how a car lease is written, and maybe depending on what state you are in, the dealer either continues to hold title to the car while it is leased to you, with the contract giving you right of possession, or you hold title to the car while the dealership has a lien on the title, so that ownership returns to the dealer at the end of the lease. This contract gave the dealer the lien rather than the title, but the way it was written, the entire contract expired at the end of the lease term, including the provision that returned the title to the dealer. So essentially, the contract disappears. My friend is left with both the car and the title to the car, and the dealer has no legal rights to the car. The dealership called her up and asked when she would be returning the car. She says, "I am not." They said, "Oh, you are buying the car then?" She says, "No, I am just going to keep it, thanks." The dealer sued her, then realized they messed up the contract and offered to settle. Since she was not completely confident that a judge would not just find a way to justify giving the car back to the dealer, since this was pretty unfair after all, she settled, but the settlement ended up being her buying the car for like 20% of its value. Comment 1. What a nice friend you have. Oh, look. A car dealer that has been completely fair to me made a formal mistake in a contract, making it completely unfair in my advantage. Let us use my superior legal knowledge to mess him up, even though he has done nothing bad to me. Your friend might be a lawyer, but her morals are those of a criminal. Edit. Just a disclaimer, because from the replies it looks like either I am a car dealer or that I am in love with the category. Many car dealers are terrible, and so are many lawyers, police officers, priests, teachers, actors, substance dealers, bakers, waiters, bankers, and so are many human beings in general. Not all of them, though. From what Orange Kid told us, the car dealer did not do anything bad in that situation. Maybe he is dishonest and he abuses animals in his spare time, but we have no way of knowing it. What I wanted to say is that in this very situation, the lawyer acted to gain property of a leased car at an unfair price by exploiting a clear mistake in a contract written from a person who did nothing wrong to her, at least from what we know. Maybe he did something bad, but Orange Kid did not mention it. According to what apparently are the morals of a peasant, I believe this to be a really awful way to behave, not so different from stealing. Story 9. I once worked with a lawyer who wrote up his own non-disclosure agreement. These are usually a page or two, and have very common things in them. This beast was nearly 10 pages, so I went through it very carefully. He had things in there like I agreed not to work with anyone I talked to while consulting for him, whether on his business or not, and that he had a complete license to anything I made or conceived of, even if I did not write it down during the time I was consulting for him. Needless to say, I redlined the thing heavily and gave it back to him, along with a standard non-disclosure agreement that I typically used. We ended up signing that one. Story 10. I worked for a group of professionals. There was a falling out over pay and time off. I agreed to stay if certain conditions were met. They insisted on a contract for my next year's work. I had already corrupted their corporate attorney. We drew up the contract together. When his secretary typed it up, he read through it and then told me that the contract obligated the corporation to pay my wages, pension, medical, dental, and other benefits for the full year, but did not obligate me to do anything in return. We put in a stipulation that it was payment for prior unpaid work. I knew none of the overeducated fools would read it, and they did not. They just signed it. Out of the pure goodness of my heart, I believe that I actually worked 14 weeks in the next year. Comment 1. There were 8 principals in the firm. I had firm proof that would have put 5 of them in prison. They were not going to do anything to anyone. They were committing felonies just casually. All 5 of them. Fraud and embezzlement were monthly occurrences. I refused to sign any city, county, state, or federal reports for them. I had copies of their signatures on enough illegal papers that I stopped photocopying and having the papers notarized as legitimate copies. I tricked them into making an entry in the corporate meeting notes that I had no signing authority for anything, including deliveries of food. That was photocopied and notarized too, in my safe deposit box. The first year after I walked out of the door, the principal's incomes dropped a minimum of $200,000 a year apiece. Comment 2. Just thought I should point out that you just admitted that you saw your presumably friend severely violate his fiduciary duties to his client. Also, you implied that you blackmailed your former employers. I am not a lawyer, but I would recommend against doing that on the internet. Story 11. I have never found anything too sneaky in the settlements I have done. Just adjustment of dates for compliance with terms, that sort of thing. Basically, as an April Fool's Day joke, a British company inserted a clause stating that purchasers were surrendering rights to their immortal souls. Most people did not click the opt-out button because very few people read the terms and conditions that come with an online purchase. Story 12. A professor of law at University Denmark got rid of a parking ticket because the sign read, "No parking in both sides of the road," and as he proclaimed in court, he only parked in one side of the road. The text on the sign is a bit more vague in Danish, but this gets the message through. Edit. So 780 people, real living beings, pressed the upvote button? Wow. I get all the novelty accounts all of a sudden. This sort of recognition is sweet. Forget Facebook. On there, it is above 50 at most. I enjoy this disproportionately much. Story 13. Ironically, it was in one of my own. At the time, I was in law school, and my significant other and I were living in an apartment. The apartment was okay, but it had really bad plumbing which was connected between apartments. We were the top apartment. Anyway, one day the plumbing burst in the apartment below us. The complex said that we had been putting pasta down our drains, and there was a clause in our lease which stated that they could fine us for damaging the plumbing by putting pasta down the drains. Not grease, not hard objects, not human waste, pasta. Luckily, I got us out of it, but it was incredibly ridiculous that I had to argue with him about it. Story 14. I reviewed a business sale contract once for the sale of a convenience store. The attorney who drafted it added a provision that he be allowed a 6-pack of beer of his choosing for free every time he visited the store. When I pointed it out to the client and confronted the other side, it was communicated to them that their lawyer added that, to see if anyone was actually reading it. It was funny, but I thought exceedingly unprofessional. Story 15. My father did that with the machines he designed. When he designed a machine for the factory he works at, he also wrote the user manual. He is head of maintenance, so every time a machine fails and his subordinates are unable to solve the issue, he has to check what went wrong. Apparently, people often called him for issues that were described in the user manual and would be solved immediately if instructions were followed. He started telling his subordinates to read the instruction manual before calling him. They say they did. He said that was not true. They said they had. When my father insisted and told them the exact page they should have checked, they usually recanted and admitted that they had not checked just that section yet, but once one of the guys insisted. No, seriously, he had checked the user manual, and he had gone through the troubleshooting routine described therein. My father told him that was not true. The guy insisted it was. Then my father said, "Okay, so what about the coffee? What coffee? What are you talking about?" At the beginning of the troubleshooting section, there is this clause stating that anyone who reads that part is entitled to a free coffee, paid for by me. Had you read it, you would know. Even if you forgot about it, as soon as I mentioned coffee, you would have remembered. Also, check out this tidbit of information about the music group Van Halen. A band's demands were not limited to technical issues. Their now infamous writer specified that a bowl of M&Ms, with all of the brown M&Ms removed, was to be placed in their dressing room. According to David Lee Roth, this was listed in the technical portion of the contract, not because the band wanted to make capricious demands of the venue, but rather as a test of whether the venue had actually read and properly honored the terms of the contract, as it contained other requirements involving legitimate safety concerns. If the bowl was present, then the band members could safely assume the other legitimate items in the technical rider were being fulfilled to their satisfaction. Conversely, if the bowl was missing or brown M&Ms were present, then the band members would be within their rights to have the venue inspect the work, ask it be redone, and so on. Their concern for safety was real. As in their earlier tours, not only was equipment damaged, but several members of their road crew were nearly electrocuted, both due to inadequate safety and preparation on the part of the local venue. Story 16. I am an attorney, and I work for a large university. A few years ago, the university bid a near-exclusive dining services contract that applied to every part of campus except the libraries. Company A won the campus-wide bid. When the libraries bid their dining services, Company B, Company A's main competitor, won the bid. Company B's contract had several exhibits. One of the exhibits was a technical exhibit, for example, how many ovens they would have, number of employees, and so on, and in the middle of the last page of the technical exhibit, in about 6-point font, it read, "University hereby terminates its contract with Company A, and hereby appoints Company B as the exclusive provider for all dining services." Story 17. I am a law student, not a lawyer, but my contract law teacher told us about a few cases she had encountered. Namely one where a company tried to add a clause in very pale gray on a contract, hoping that the other party would not notice or would assume it was a break or that it had been invalidated. Also, in a case in particular, a placement agency had a clause in the contract they signed with their clients saying that the client could not be employed elsewhere. Otherwise, they would be forced to pay a $1,200 fee. However, the guaranteed number of hours was not respected, and the employees could not make a living with the offered hours and pay, so many took a second job and were subsequently sued by the agency. Thankfully, the judge ruled in favor of the employees, but I felt this could relate to the question pretty well. Agents de placement Roy Limite versus Ryu, 1997 RL. 297, CQ. It was a penal clause which basically means excessive liquidated damages and is not valid in common law. However, it is in civil law, but the prejudice must be proven, not the opposite way around, which is good for the smaller party which needs to be protected. The exclusivity clause was invalidated 1437 CCQ because it was an abusive clause, and when the principal falls, the accessory falls, which means that the penal clause was also invalidated. Thankfully, sorry if my English is awkward, edit. Okay, thank you, I guess. My English is not as awkward as I thought, haha. Let it only be known that I study law in French, and that my warning was mostly due to my fear of using wrong terminology and misleading people. Comment 1. If the mortgage company does not have the original contract that my grandmother signed, it is null and void if we are unable to find our copy as well. The mortgage has been passed around to several companies, and no one wants to default. Can you guess why? Comment 2. If nobody can find a copy of the original contract, how do you prove that the clause exists? Comment 3. Because they have the first 5 pages but not the folder that has the signature. It must have been lost, and they do not want to admit it. They keep the property clean and pay taxes on it. She has been dead for 5 years and her 2 kids will not sign papers to get it put in their names. Comment 4. Dude, you are going to lose your house. Loans are not enforceable against objects, a house. They are enforceable against people or legal entities like the estate of the deceased. A house is not a legal entity. If it is a mortgage, then the mortgage names the person it is tied to. It is not on the house. It uses the house as collateral against the named person. The bank does not have title to the house, your grandmother's estate does. The bank is taking steps to secure title, paying taxes and upkeep. Since nobody is claiming the title to the house, you need to take title of the house. When the bank tries to enforce the loan against the estate, the executor of the estate, also known as the executor of the will, says, "Sure, show proof of that loan." If what you say is correct and they have lost all the proof a loan ever existed, then the loan becomes unenforceable and the title of the house goes to your grandmother's heirs, the way you are doing it now. The bank is going to take ownership of the house, then evict you. I do not know what is really happening from what you said, but I would bet hard money you are screwing yourself over by trying to be clever. Story 18. Not an attorney, but when my husband and I rented our first house, the leasing company was owned by a group of attorneys. They put must return property in the same or better condition, which is pretty much impossible in a home over a year's time and apparently illegal for a rental contract in Ohio. They tried to charge us $300 over our deposit and threatened to sue us for it. We got our own attorney and they backed off. Story 19. Not necessarily a sneaky clause, just a sneaky use of it. I worked for many years for federal government departments. These departments, particularly the higher levels of them, would often hire expensive consultants for various reasons or projects. After all, what the heck, it was only taxpayer money, and it was useful to hire expensive consultants so that when something all fell apart years later, those responsible could say, "It is not our fault, we hired a really expensive consultant." Anyway, in order to cut down on excessive hemorrhaging of money. A rule had been put in a long time ago that if a consultant was engaged for a short time, they could be paid hourly rates, which were pretty wallet gouging, but if they continued to be engaged by the department for more than a certain period, 6 weeks, I think, they were to be switched to a much less expensive longer-term contract, essentially swapping higher rates for a more stable income source. One specialist consultant we heard about was brought in and, to justify his rather high hourly rates, somewhere north of $400 per hour, was assigned to assist multiple important bosses in multiple areas, so theoretically he would never be idle on the government dollar. So far, so standard, except that when the time came around for him to be switched to the long-term contract, all the bosses of his who could have signed off on the change assumed it had already been done by one of the other bosses, and did not really want to chase it up personally, because hey, it was not coming out of their budget, and it was additional work which, if ignored long enough, someone else might do. Also, if any of them did do it themselves, it would be admitting that they had more free time than their contemporaries, and their own bosses would find more work to take up that free time whether it existed or not, so no one signed the changeover, and the consultant very conscientiously came in early, signed out late, submitted his timesheets, and kept being paid at the hourly rate for over a year. When an audit finally spotted what had happened, they tried to sue him to reclaim part of the $1 million+ they had paid him over that time. Unfortunately for them, the contract was pretty much airtight, and nowhere in it did it mention that it was for a maximum time only, or that after 6 weeks he should be switched to the lower rate. That was merely a departmental policy, not law. Of course, they canceled his existing contract as soon as possible and did not invite him back. But somehow I do not think he was too worried. Story 20. Mark Zuckerberg was an equal-stake founder of Facebook in its younger days, with Eduardo Saverin. 60% to 40%, something like that. Eduardo got sneaky and dropped his responsibilities almost completely, and started sneaking ads for his new startup, Slice, into Facebook without Mark's permission, which he was developing behind Mark's back while he was supposed to be working on Facebook. If you remember the older days of the internet, ads were extremely unpopular and could easily drive away the hard-earned user base of the tiny startup. Mark was furious, as Eduardo had been slacking off and giving excuses for a long time coming. Now this, after discussion with his angel investor, Peter Thiel, they sneaked a clause into a new contract, which was only supposed to readjust equity, very common when seeking investor funds, giving Mark the ability to vote by proxy on Eduardo's shares on all material matters, as per company law. Mark then set up a new company in a different state to acquire the original company, used Eduardo's proxy votes in the old company to approve the merger, then gave Eduardo a 0.02% stake in the new company. Nobody else's equity stake was changed. Eduardo's stake was given to a new investor, the one Mark dismissed in the movie, effectively kicking only Eduardo out from Facebook. After the events of the movie, Eduardo's stake was restored to 7% from his original 22% before the shenanigans. He is now worth north of $4 billion, which could have been more than $20 billion if all this had not happened. If you have watched The Social Network, you have seen the proceedings. Story 21. Not a lawyer, but I almost signed a contract that was for a well-paying entry-level job. There was a little note halfway into the contract that if I was to get promoted, then I would not be paid, as in, ever. Ever since I inquired about that, they have been ignoring me. Story 22. I had to sign a non-compete and non-disclosure agreement when I started work for a small tech firm. Pretty standard. I had did some travel at the company's expense, and when I quit, the owner came after me stating that I owed him for this, because it was in my contract that I had to pay back any expenses for 2 years prior to my separation. I had never seen this on the contract, and he did not know that as I was filling out my paperwork for the job, I had initialed each page and asked the secretary to make me a copy. He had added 4 pages to the contract and forged my signature. Turns out he had done this for all of the others as well. He had his attorney file a case against me and 2 others that had left when I did. Luckily, one of them also had a copy of his original contract, and we were able to get him investigated for fraud and forgery. His fiancée was the daughter of his lawyer. I knew he was also intimate with one of the women that worked in the accounts payable department. One phone call to his fiancée, she showed up and caught them in his van, and her daddy broke off all legal services. The case fell apart and he got 2 years in a state prison. Too long. Did not read. Do not mess with your employees' contracts. Also, do not be intimate with other women if your fiancée is also your attorney's daughter. Story 23. After reading some answers here, I am really curious about contracts in general in America. I live in Brazil, by the way. Do you not have laws against absurd clauses in contracts? Here in Brazil, if someone puts absurd clauses in a contract like some that I read here, you have to keep the cats if you buy the house. House cannot be sold to a colored person. We are not responsible for the safety of your employees' private information, and so on. The contract is considered void and null. It does not matter if you signed the contract with your blood. You do not have to obey any strange clause. Also, if a contract here in Brazil is written with the text formatting, size 10-point color, black for example, but there is a clause with format size 6-point color, light gray. That clause is considered void and null. because the contract is trying to deceive the person that is signing it. Story 24. I am a lawyer. It is my habit that, when somebody in any retail business hands me a form requiring my signature, I return it to them unsigned. If they notice and ask, then I do not put up a fight, but this practice has helped me immensely in the past. Most recently, it helped when I tried to ship a golf club to a friend who had left it at my house. I got it boxed up, went to UPS, and got the person to ship it. They handed me a form to fill out with the standard, "We are not responsible for your stuff" clause, and I did not sign it. The clerk did not notice. When it showed up at my friend's house in 2 pieces, seriously, what the heck did they do? Folded in half. I called UPS to complain. They said, "But you signed a contract blah blah blah," to which I replied, "Good luck finding one with my signature on it." In the end, I was able to negotiate $400 out of them. Since replacing one iron in a set of golf clubs is pretty tough to do, I have no ethical qualms about this. They are depending on the consumer either not understanding or not noticing the important clauses in their contracts. So I feel it is pretty fair when I depend on their employees to do the same. Story 25. Barely applicable to your question, but in the vein of other responses, so here goes. My sadly now deceased sister-in-law took a job with a major hardware store chain. Not Home Depot. Shortly after being hired, they had her sign a credit card application for an American Express card. She did not think much of it at the time. She was young and not very financially savvy, and soon forgot about it altogether. 3 years later, they laid her off. A couple of months after that, they sent her a notice demanding she relinquish her rights to her American Express members' rewards points, over 1.5 million of them. See, they had illegally, we came to learn, been using her credit to pay for travel expenses for the company's salespersons. 3 years of travel, airfare, hotels, car rentals, and so on. All the while, the card was racking up members' rewards points. Her and my brother hired a lawyer, and they were able to keep all of the points through a negotiated settlement. The company had no legal claim to the points, and if the issue went to court, they faced potential liability and a countersuit for unlawfully using her credit for company expenses. While she had signed the card application, she never formally authorized them to use her credit. They lived pretty well for a few years. They were able to go to Hawaii, virtually expense-free twice. Plus, they flew out to see myself and other family members for the weekend whenever they felt like it. The best part for her, though, was the revenge factor. She really liked her job and was angry about getting laid off. Story 26. While not necessarily sneaky, I find the concept of the poison pill to be nefarious. A poison pill is essentially a provision in some corporate documents which triggers when a person attempts to purchase a significant portion of the company from the shareholders, usually with pretty nasty effects to the purchaser. For example, a poison pill may trigger when a single person attempts to purchase 20% of a corporation. This poison pill may give all the shareholders, except the prospective purchaser, a chance to buy tons of shares at a minimal price and have the corporation pay for that expense. This would mean that the purchaser who just purchased a 20% share of the corporation would have much, much less of the corporation. Poison pills have been upheld in court. But they are controversial because they enable corporate boards to entrench themselves in the company and effectively restrict shareholders from being able to sell their shares in many instances. Story 27. My matrimonial lawyer gave me a retainer agreement, which states that she will charge $250 an hour. Fees are usually based on the hourly rate. However, in certain circumstances, the fees can be more, for example, if she has to set aside other work, or if she has to work on an expedited basis. Blah blah blah, until we get to my personal favorite, higher fees if she gets me an exceptionally good result. So who is going to decide what is an exceptionally good result? Yes, and I am sure she will reduce her hourly rate if she gets an exceptionally bad result. This is why people hate lawyers, because they are parasites. $1,000 for a desk-ordered divorce? Crap, that is 45 minutes of secretarial work. Comment 1. Crap, that is 45 minutes of secretarial work. Yes, it is. However, if I am doing your divorce and I make an awful mess of it, losing you your house or something, Who are you going to sue? The fees are high because it takes years of university and training to do the job as accurately as it needs to be done, I grant you. If the lawyer's fees are higher than the assets you have in the first place, then yes, it should be done at a greatly reduced rate. Comment 2 seems rather easy. Prove that this lawyer has gotten this type of result before or has charged someone prior for an exceptionally good result. Then your result is not an exception, it is common. No need to pay the lawyer. Story 28. I deal with wage-hour law, so I deal with anything to do with wages, employment law. I have had employers try to pay an employee $8 per hour, the minimum wage in California, and escort the employee to the check cashing firm, only to turn over 60% of their wages, as a condition of employment, in cash back to the employer. It happens all of the time. Redditors would be surprised if they realized how much they could potentially be screwed over in the job sector. Remember, an employer's job is to make a profit, not employ employees. Comment 1. Here in Florida, my wife told her company that she was pregnant and would need to either take time off or change positions at the beginning of the year. This was 3 months ago. The time comes to change positions. She is 8 months pregnant, and they tried to bully her into taking a position with a 60% pay cut and to continue working while pregnant. When she refused, they fired her outright. The human resources girl, who was instrumental in getting her fired, took her job. She even got an email from the owner of the company detailing how disappointed he was in her for not giving enough notice, and that they created the low-paying job specifically for her. This is a medical company as well. Story 29. My freshman English teacher in high school once taught us to read every word of contracts, to look for hidden meanings. He has a friend that lost $1 million because of a hidden meaning in a clause. Comment 1. Not a hidden meaning but hidden. Do not forget the Van Halen Brown M&M clause, which was not put in their contract rider. But the stage construction and safety instructions, they knew that if there were brown M&Ms in the bowl, that the Teamsters or whoever built their stage probably did not follow all of the detailed instructions. Once that happened to them in Denver, and the floor beneath the stage collapsed. Story 30. Conveyancing firm in the United Kingdom, dealing with a complete jerk other side. Attorney and client, who kept saying they were waiting on documents from us to their client, when it was actually us waiting for them to respond. It went on and on and on like this, and they took weeks to respond to basic inquiries. We ended up putting a clause in the exchange on contracts, basically an agreement to purchase. Deposit goes across, and if you back out afterwards, you lose deposit and breach contract. And did not use standard conditions, and had a clause that said the purchaser's conveyancers were to pay for professional window cleaning once a month for 2 years. It would have been arguable in court if it was valid, as the client signed the contract, and the firm would not be held for the client promising it, obviously, but with a stroke of luck. The firm signed on the client's behalf, which you can do on exchange, not completion. A month after it was all concluded, and parties had both moved house, we sent them a letter asking for the contract to be upheld. We never heard anything back whatsoever for over 6 weeks. Then they agreed a date for it to be done, and argued it was a gesture of goodwill, and it would not be valid, and so on. And a few hilarious phone calls pointing out they signed it, and had a duty to explain it fully to the client prior to signing it, so could not argue they had no idea. The firm I worked for went into voluntary liquidation soon after, and we were not able to keep it up. We let our client know though. I believe it ended up getting sorted, and he was getting his windows cleaned for 6 other times. Conveyancing is boring 99% of the time. That 1% was fun, too long, did not read. Conveyancing in the United Kingdom. Put in contract that the other side's representation will clean our client's house windows once a month for 2 years. They did not read it fully and signed. It sort of worked. Story 31. A little late to the thread, but there was a story in the local paper about the lowest rent in the city. 2 people were only paying the equivalent of $84 per month to live in a 50 square meter apartment in a fairly attractive part of town. A normal rent would be well over 10 times that amount. $84 per month could not buy a parking space in the city, The story was that the owner of the apartment complex wanted to sell the apartments back in 1977, but the rules were that first he would have to offer the tenants a chance to buy the apartments in some sort of housing equity partnership, so in order to discourage them from doing that, he offered them a contract which stated that the rent could never increase. Two brothers still live in one of the apartments to this day, and refuse to move out even after being offered the equivalent of $100,000 each to move out. The owner took them to court, but the court upheld the contract. Story 32. Not a lawyer, but here is my story of why it is important to read every little clause in things you sign. Before everything was digital, you would get your coverage papers from the insurance company in a big stack of papers that would normally get thrown out. At the bottom of each page was a number and a dash stating when the page was placed into the packet. Some were much older than others. When I got into a nasty car accident, totaling my car and beating me up pretty good in the process, I thought I was in trouble. I had no insurance, and as soon as the hospital I was in found out, they took all the braces and crutches away, and all but kicked me out with a substantial bill, beaten and broken. I began reading through my coverage, and happened upon a certain clause stating that if I was in an accident, and safety bags were deployed and I had my seatbelt on, I could receive special medical coverage, up to a quite large amount. I called the company and spoke with a bunch of people who said that clause was no longer valid. A day later, I got a call from what I am guessing was a lawyer or someone high up. Apparently, a couple hundred packets had gone out with this clause that had expired 5 years earlier. They said they would send a check, but that they were ending their relationship with me, and that I had to sign things to absolve them anyway. Always read the fine print and always call and ask.